So, if this is your first time, we've been talking about love in my time with you for 6 weeks now, all right? Started with that song, thought it'd be a good way to pull it back together. And the theme has been believe in love, love built this, but we've been looking at how love is central to the human experience, and Gene, I appreciate your doing 1 Corinthians 13. I mean, who would do a series on love and not do 1 Corinthians 13? I guess that would be me. Because I didn't do it. So I thank you. There's just so much love to talk about in the Scriptures. And I've mentioned that a couple different times. When people think of the Scriptures, they don't think about love. But we can't exhaust the love that just oozes through the Scriptures. You know, yeah, there's the other stuff too, but unfortunately, it's not the love, sweet love that comes through for most. But honestly, sometimes love, as much as it's central to our existence, it can sometimes feel a little awkward. I don't know if you've ever been challenged to, like, if you're a guy and you shave with your right hand, have you ever tried to shave with your left and see how that went? Or women. You know, if you're a right eyeliner type person, you know, how would you feel about, you know, trying to do that with the other hand? You know, it would be awkward, right? Or writing. You know, sometimes we were challenged, you know, as kids to see if we could write. Well, love can feel awkward like that. But now when you're holding a newborn baby, oh, that's easy, isn't it? Oh, that's love. That's just really right in love's wheelhouse. That's not challenging at all. But if you're out in the world, if you're engaging with people, out in the trenches, you might say, there at times can be nothing more challenging than love. So as we wrap up our conversation and focus on love, but really we're about love all the time, but here we've really kind of drilled in on it. I want to talk about the hard work of love. So last time we were together, we were reminded or perhaps introduced to what our relationship with Christ, and sometimes we refer to it as our love relationship with Christ, but I don't necessarily want to use that language because that's, as Gina says, that's a whole other sermon. But as we have entered into a relationship with Jesus Christ, that is to change us. There are some things that are supposed to take place in our lives, and we looked specifically at Colossians 3. Don't put it on the screen yet. And so anyone remember what that connection with Christ is supposed to do to us? And I don't feel bad. No one remembers sermons. You just kind of remember the feeling. I get that. All right, so here's what Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 3. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Paul says that when you enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ, you're to put away, he says, like, put off a bad temper, your irritability, your meanness, your profanity, what the message calls the dirty talk. You know, don't lie to one another. And the list could go on and on, but he said that when you come into a relationship with Jesus Christ, that those type of behaviors in your life are going to be seen in the, hopefully, expectantly, in the rear view mirror. Okay, well, now if you're standing there having taken off all of that stuff, you don't want to hang around naked necessarily. And so Paul says, but this is what you put on. You put on compassion. You put on kindness. You put on meekness and humility and quietness and strength and the list that Gina gave you this morning. Quiet strength, discipline. You're going to put on being even-tempered. But then he concludes it. Remember, he concludes it, but he says what? And above all, what does he say to put on? Put on love. Yeah. Above all. So he talks about all these things you need to get rid of, all these things you can put on, but Paul wants to be very clear. Above all, you put on love. Love brings with it certain responsibilities, doesn't it? Now notice that one of the ways that we think about that list of putting off and putting on. It's all self-directed in some sense, right? I understand it has implications externally, but Paul's directive is, the seedlings of that is, get your act together. That's an instruction to us. And so as we wrap up our focus on love, I want us to look at a scripture that takes love and puts a slightly different spin on it, like as if you were looking at a diamond and you catch it in just a slightly different light. So there's this beautiful passage Beth read for us. We're going to read it again today. And it says, let us consider how to spur up one another to love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, you might catch me stating it differently because this was one of my very first memory verses from the Navigator Bible Memory Series. I memorized it from the Revised Standard Version, and this is the New Revised Standard Version. So I memorize this. Now let us stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting. So it's my language is stir up, and that's good too. The point is that we all need encouragement, right? So I was our senior class president at Belvedere High School. Now, how I got there was an act of encouragement. See, Tim Ryan had been class president 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. So looks like he was going to run the deck. And I was dating this woman named Betsy, and she said, you should run against him. I'm like, I don't know, Tim was pretty popular, but I'd been in the drug scene a little bit, so I knew a bunch of them. I'd been in the theater, so I knew a bunch of them. And I'd been in sports, so I knew a bunch of people. I said, okay, I can do that, happy girlfriend thing. And so it comes to the day, and we're going to vote. And for whatever reason, I said, well, I'm going to vote for Tim, because I was a new Christian, and this whole thing of like, you should lay your life down, you should think more highly of others than you think of yourself. So I said, I'm going to vote for Tim. She said, no, you're not going to vote for Tim. She said, you're going to vote for yourself. I said, okay, dear. I learned that phrase early. Okay, dear. I won by one vote. If I would have voted for Tim, Tim would have won by one vote. Right. And he'd have run the deck. 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th, 12th. So anyway, so part of my responsibilities then, as senior class president and guy like minister dude, was that I was invited to the 5th year reunion. And there I had to share the stories of, we lost 14 classmates in that first 5 years, most of them through freak accidents. It was a really painful first 5-year class reunion. After that, it was kind of spotty if I even got contact information about our next 5 to 10 year, 15 class reunions. And it was kind of weird that I wouldn't get invitations. Except that Brad, the one who was in charge of giving people, making sure the invitations got sent out, had a thing for this girl named Betsy, and he lost and I won, and so I don't know if that was it, but he always would say when we did reconnect, well, I just didn't know where you were. I thought, well, how hard is it to find a Methodist minister, even before the age of the internet, So. Anyway, so it came to the 50th, all right? So we had the 50th, and I got the invitation. I have to admit, I didn't feel 100% like going. I'm not all that good at names. I didn't want people to walk up to me and go, who are you? And how many times could I say, gee, you haven't changed, and keep a straight face? But Betsy's like, no, honey, we need to go. And I said, well, I might have a wedding. I might have a funeral. I might have like a Sunday morning I've got to get ready for, but happy wife type thing. So we go, and getting ready to get in the car. I said, so I was asked to give the invocation, So I said, well, you better drive because I haven't given this any thought yet. Can't imagine. So on the way there, I wrote this piece. And it began by saying, well, I was asked to give the invocation, but this is really not going to be that. And my next line was, we've come a long way, baby. And I began with all the positive changes that had taken place in our lives. And then I flipped a switch and listed just some of the challenges that we were experiencing and some of the ways we'd moved away from our better angels. And I closed with a prayer and a blessing for the meal. It was almost kind of an altar call to our better angels. But it was a prayer with what shall we do with the privilege that each of us has in life. And that's true with this group too. We are privileged. So I asked them, what are we going to do with the privilege that each of us enjoy in this room tonight? Now, to help give the context, that was in 2023, if you know your history at all. And as I said, I'm going to be really frank with you, I didn't want to go. But, happy wife. And so we went, and we had an amazing night. So many wonderful, deep conversations. Betsy and I had a conversation with a man and his wife, and he shared that he was confused and hurt by something that we as a couple, because he was with another woman at the time, had done 30 years ago. And that night gave an opportunity for him, to talk to us. It was so meaningful. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. And so see, that took place because Betsy spurred me on. See, I think a big part of the problem of love for us historically has been, well, like Shakespeare. Love is all about romance and love for a man and a woman and a man, or now today it would be a them and one woman and two men, or two men, and pretty soon they all start killing each other because of love. And that's what Shakespeare does. It's all about romance. It's all about one person loving another person. And it's not that much about what I might call communal love or human love. And it's almost as if the language of love is exclusive to romance rather than the power of human relationships. So love is about romance rather than about sacrifice and about commitment. And that's why I think this passage is so important for us, because this passage says that love needs to be thought about. Love is a work, if you will, and potentially a hard work. Here again, she says, and so why do I say she says? Well, you've got all these names, Paul the writer, Ephesus and Timothy and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. You've got all these book of Hebrews is just like, oh, Hebrews. Well, the thought is that a woman wrote Hebrews, and women were held in utterly disdain and no respect these days. Maybe we still have long ways to go. But if they'd put a woman's name on it, this literature would have never gotten off the ground at all. And so that's why I'm going to say she says. So here she says, let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. And I think that's wonderful. It's important because sometimes we think love just happens naturally, that you don't need to work at it. You just wake up in the morning and you go, oh, I'm so in love. I'm in love with life. I'm in love with coffee. I'm in love with her. I'm in love with him. I'm in love with them. I just love. Wouldn't that be great? If that was the only emotion you experienced when you woke up in the morning, it just came so naturally. But she says, spur one another on towards love. In plain English, it means that love is something that has to be worked on. That love is something that must be inspired. Consider, then, how to spur one another on to love and good deeds. Because the moment you actually find love, love moves you into action. Love calls forth action. So how do we spur each other on towards love? Well, in any world, for that to take place, there needs to be connection, right? There needs to be interaction. I mean, we can't do this telepathically. So if we're going to stir someone up to love, if we're going to spur them on, that's together language. Now, some have speculated that maybe that's why some people avoid groups, right? And one of those groups that people might avoid is the church, because it might be possible that as they consider coming together, that their life might be challenged, or their life might be encouraged to change, to live on a higher plane. And even though I doubt that they would understand it or explain it that way, and they certainly wouldn't articulate it that way, that may be the underpinnings of what's taking place. Which, by the way, is why it's connected to the next part of that verse. And let us consider how to stir up or spur up one another to love and good works, not giving up meeting together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. I think it's really interesting that almost right out of the box, I mean, Jesus' trip to heaven, the escalator had barely hit that floor, and there was already a problem with church attendance. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together. That was already an issue. They, like many today, saw gathering together as something less than essential. And so why is it important to meet together? Why is this connected to spurring one another towards love and good works? Because the dynamic of community, the dynamic of being together as a tribe, is what allows us to call each other to our highest selves. See, I'm pretty sure if left to myself, I would not have gone to that class reunion. You know, it's a story of the guy who woke up Sunday morning and told his wife, honey, I don't feel like going to church today. And she said, but dear, you're the pastor. Everyone's expecting you to be there. I was the senior class president, and it would be nice. It was expected, that I would be there. But left to my own devices, I might not well have gotten into that car that night. I might not have given that little 7-minute invocation that moved so many, and there were so many wonderful connections and conversations that came out of it. I might simply have avoided it, but because I'm a part of something bigger than myself, in this case, Betsy, she made me better. She made me better than I am by myself. And what I want you to know is this is a part of what the church is all about. It's not just about attending a gathering. It's about becoming a movement that together and spurring one another towards greater love and greater deeds. So the reality is that this is very different than most of what we grew up with, because if you have a phone or a tablet or get a newspaper or any type of communication, we are inundated every day with this boatload of concerns and issues and horror stories. And one of the great tragedies of today is it's so easy to slip into compassion fatigue. But see, the point is we need, to help pull us out of that. We need one another. We need to spur each other out of that. We need to pull each other along so that we encourage the best out of each other. So a question could be asked. So when you leave here, is that your experience? Have you been encouraged to a higher place? Have you been encouraged, spurred on to love and good works? And it's not just Mr. Preacher Man. Notice that she says, let us encourage. Not a speaker. It's let us encourage how to stir up one another to love and good works. See, apart from that, there's something in us that's inherently prone to stop. There's something inherently prone to our failure of our heart, that if left unattended, we will drift towards apathy and indifference. And so we have to spur one another on to love and good works. We have to create a movement of love and make sure that love keeps motivating us to do what's right in the world, what the world needs now, right? See, we need to do what no one expects of us except God. So one big change I didn't note in my 50th reunion invocation was the change in attendance. right? I think most of us who've been around the block, as I have, it used to be, man, if you weren't in church, that was unusual. Like attendance was like expected, and you had your pew. We still do that, but you have your pew, and I was met by the same white-gloved usher every Sunday morning, and now even in growing, thriving churches, mega churches, average attendance is somewhere hovering around twice a month. I mean, that pattern has really changed. But when that takes place, we're not given the opportunity when people aren't here preaching in the choir. But when people aren't here, we don't have the opportunity to spur one another on to love and good works. So I keep circling back to what can we do together that we could never do alone. See, that's the power and the beauty of the church. See, conversely, when we're on our own, I hate to break it to you, but we're kind of invisible, But when we come together, we're a movement. We're a visible manifestation of the presence of God to a world much of which doesn't know God nor give two hoots that God exists and that God loves them and loves the world. So last time we were together, I briefly mentioned Bill Hybel's study about why people either stop going to church or never stopped going to or never started attending church. Number one was, they want your money, right? Number two was the church, this isn't relevant, to my life. And then they talked about being preached down to, and then they talked about music feeling not in step with the times. My own experience has been, I don't do church. It's just me and God, bedside Baptist type of thing. Or it's just me and the fellows grabbing a cappuccino or going fishing, going golfing, whatever. They're just hanging, or a lot of people just stay home and watch the Sunday morning, talk shows. So I think it's interesting that even the early church struggled with this. And whoever wrote this book, she seems to be saying that they avoided coming together because the early church was structured in such a way to intentionally spur one another on to love and good works. See, we're not supposed to come here just to get a good feeling about ourselves, but believe me, that's the way most do come to church. We're not just supposed to come here to get help for our personal lives. We're supposed to come here to gather together to ask the big questions in life and address the concerns of community and city and state and nation and world. John Wesley, the world is my parish. Left to myself, what can I even begin to do to address the millions of refugees starving to death, or solve the problem of children not having a home or shelter or water in Africa, or the problem of homelessness, racism, or injustice? It'd be just so easy just to after inundated, just to pull the proverbial covers up over my head. But it's having power in community. That which I cannot even fathom doing alone, we can do together. And one of the most beautiful things that God has ever done is pulled us together so that we can accomplish greater things than we ever could individually. Now, according to our mission, we gather for personal enrichment and growth. And this is our first part of our statement, right? We gather to make disciples for Jesus Christ. But see, John Wesley, for him, that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to say, you're here for your own personal edification. The rest of the statement is, make disciples of Jesus Christ. What's the rest of it out here? Right, for the transformation of the world. See, we can't transform the world on our own. We can only transform it when 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3. See, when we're gathered together, Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there's something special. 1 + 1 + 1 does not equal 3. I don't know what big number it equals, but it's a lot more than 3. John says it like this over in 1 John 3:16. I think it's so cool that that's 1 John 3:16, because we're all familiar with John 3:16. But in 1 John, what we call, they didn't number and we have. In 1 John 3:16, as we record, it says, this is how we know what love is. That Jesus Christ laid his life down for us. We ought to lay our lives down for our sisters and our brothers. See, John said Jesus set the standard. This is what love is. Don't confuse love with bringing roses or finding some fine chocolates. Those are fine ways to express love, but the clearest and most powerful example of what love is God in Christ laid down his life on our behalf. And if we understand that this is the standard of love, then we'll give away our life for others. See, the movement of Jesus is a movement of love. Jesus calling us out of our apathy moves us out of our indifference. He elevates the bar. See, on my own, I'm not going to solve the problem of 2 million who are starving in the Sudan. But through Church World Service, United Women of Faith, the Advance, our apportionment, we can make a difference. So I did the Ironman up in Madison, and I was always nervous, couldn't get to sleep very early. But they have a square. The square is just before the chute, where if you're fortunate enough, you go down the chute, and they say, Kurt Gamblin, you're an Ironman. But on that square, there's a church. And one night when I was just walking around, I saw some women who were sleeping there on their portico, just at a slab, steps up. And so I went over and talked to them. The church had a special relationship with the city of Madison, right across from the big famous Wisconsin-Madison government building, that allowed them to stay there. And for them, it was wonderful because they weren't being hounded to, no, you can't be here, you can't be here, you can't be there. That church made a difference in their lives. While completely selfishly, one of the aspects of the local churches, is that we no longer operate pad shelters. Now, again, it's just a selfish thing in me. I know that 1,000% it's better for the homeless to have the year-round shelter, which is right up down the street there towards Crystal Lake. Better for lots of reasons. But what I notice in my own life is that it's out of sight, out of mind. And I know so many people's lives who were affected because they talked to people who were homeless, and they couldn't imagine that, you used to be an accountant, you used to do this, you used to do that, because we have this image of perpetual homelessness, unhoused, people being unhoused. And so we've removed that. People's lives being changed, but we need to support the work that's there now. It all starts with a spark. It only takes a spark, right, to get a fire going. It takes that spark is coming together. So I thank you, those of you who are here. I realize I'm preaching to the choir. It only takes a spark to get the fire going, and you are here helping to fan the flame. And for that, I am thankful. Amen.